Every single last one.
Who do we mainly clap for? Jesus. Boom, who said that? Way to go. Yeah, so when we clap, you know, as awesome as the worship band is, and seriously, you guys, they're great, we're clapping for Jesus, right? Because ultimately our praise is for him. And so with that on our minds, talking about Jesus tonight, you may have noticed that tonight looks a little different. So we normally do 2 songs when we start. We did 3. We added on one there. We normally will do announcements after. I just have one announcement today, so I'll make it at the end of this. And that's because Christmas is coming. And for a lot of us, Christmas is a season that can be filled with a lot of stress, right? How many of you, like, your Christmas is a little stressful, if you were being honest? Like, maybe it's family stuff. Maybe it's friends stuff. Maybe it's school. Like, how many of you is school your biggest stressor right now? You know, and so for a lot of us, Christmas can be stressful. But I think there's something really unique to be said about getting together to celebrate this awesome gift that Jesus gave us. And so tonight's looking a little different. I'm actually going to read to you guys. This is like story time with Caitlyn. But I'm going to read you guys, I think, just a really fantastic passage about Jesus coming into this world. All right. It all happened in a moment, a most remarkable moment. As moments go, this moment appeared no different than any other. If you could somehow pick it off of the timeline and examine it, it would look exactly like the ones that have passed while you've been listening to these words. It came and it went. It was preceded and succeeded by others just like it. It was one of the countless moments that have marked time since eternity became immeasurable. But in reality, that particular moment was like none other. For through that segment of time, a spectacular thing occurred. God became man. While the creatures of earth walked unaware, divinity arrived. Heaven opened herself and placed her most precious one in a human womb. The omnipotent, in one instant, made himself breakable. He who had been a spirit made himself pierceable. He who was larger than the universe became an embryo. And he who sustains the world with a word chose to become dependent upon the nourishment of a young girl. God as a fetus, holiness sleeping in a womb, the creator of life being created. God was given eyebrows, elbows, 2 kidneys, and a spleen. He stretched against the walls and floated in the amniotic fluids of his mother. God had come near. He came not as a flash of light or as an unapproachable conqueror, but as one whose first cries were heard by a peasant girl and a sleepy carpenter. The hands that first held him were unmanicured, calloused, and dirty. There was no silk, there was no ivory, there was no hype, no party, no hoopla. Were it not for the shepherds, there would have been absolutely no reception. And if not for a group of stargazers, there would have been no gifts. Angels watched as Mary changed God's diaper. The universe watched with wonder as the Almighty learned to walk. Children played in the street with him, and had the synagogue leaders in Nazareth known who was listening to their sermons. Jesus may have had pimples. He may have been tone deaf. Perhaps a girl down the street had a crush on him, or vice versa. It could be that his knees were bony. One thing's for sure. He was, well, completely God, completely human. And for 33 years, he would feel everything that you and I have ever felt. He felt weak. He grew weary. He was afraid of failure. He was susceptible to wooing women. He got colds, he burped, and he probably had body odor. His feelings got hurt, his feet got tired, and his head ached. To think of Jesus like this, well, it seems almost irreverent, doesn't it? It's not something we like to do. It's really uncomfortable. It's much easier to keep the humanity out of the incarnation, to clean the manure from around the manger and to wipe the sweat out of his eyes, and to pretend that he never snored or blew his nose or hit his thumb with a hammer. He's easier to stomach that way. There's something about keeping him divine that keeps him distant, keeps him packaged, keeps him predictable. But don't do it. For heaven's sake, don't. Let him be as human as he intended to be. Let him into the mire and the muck of your world. For only if we let him in can he pull us out. Listen to him. Love your neighbor was spoken by a man whose neighbors tried to kill him. This challenge to leave your family for the gospel was issued by one who kissed his mother goodbye in the doorway. Pray for those who persecute you came from the lips that would soon be begging God to forgive his murderers. I am with you always are the words of a God who in one instant did the impossible to make everything possible for you and for me. It all happened in a moment, in one moment, a most remarkable moment. The Word became flesh. There will be another. The world will see another instantaneous transformation. You see, in becoming man, God made it possible for man to see God. When Jesus went home, he left the back door open. As a result, it says, we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. The first moment of transformation went unnoticed by the world, but you can bet your sweet September that the second one won't. The next time that you use the phrase, just one moment, remember that that's all the time it took to change the world. Now I want to read you guys a story about the night that Jesus was born, told from a different perspective than you might normally hear. The noise and the bustle began earlier than usual in the village. The night gave way to dawn. People were already on the streets. There were vendors positioning themselves on the corner of the most heavily traveled avenues. Store owners were unlocking their doors to their shops. Children were awakened by the excited barking of street dogs and the complaints of donkeys pulling the carts. The owner of the inn had awakened earlier than most in the town. After all, the inn was full. All the beds were taken. Soon the customers would be stirring and there would be a lot of work to do because every mat and every blanket had been put to good use. One's imagination is kindled thinking about the conversation of the innkeeper and his family at the breakfast table. Did anyone mention the arrival of the young couple the night before? Did anyone ask about their welfare? Did anyone comment about the pregnancy of the girl who was on the donkey? Perhaps. Maybe someone raised the subject. But at best it was raised and it wasn't discussed, because there was nothing that novel about them. They were possibly one of several families who had been turned away by the innkeeper that night. Besides, who had the time to talk about them when there was so much excitement in the air? Because Augustus, who did the economy of Bethlehem a favor when he decreed a census should be taken, who could remember when such commerce had ever hit the village before? No, it's doubtful that anybody mentioned the couple's arrival or wondered about the condition of the girl. They were all too busy. The day was upon them, the day's bread had to be made, the morning's chores had to be done, and there was too much to do to imagine that the impossible had just occurred. God had entered the world as a baby. Yet there was someone to chance upon the sheep stable in the outskirts of Bethlehem that morning. What a peculiar scene they would have beholden. The stable, it stinks like all stables do. The stench of urine and poop and sheep reeks pungently in the air. The ground is hard, the hay is scarce, cobwebs clung to the ceiling, and a mouse scurried across the dirt floor. A more lowly place of birth could not have existed. Off to one side sat a group of shepherds, and they sit silently on the floor, perhaps perplexed, perhaps in awe, no doubt in amazement. Their night watch had been interrupted by an explosion of light from heaven and a group of angels. God goes to those who have the time to hear them. And so on this cloudless night, he went to the simple shepherds. Near the young mother sits the weary father. If anyone is dozing, it's him. He can't remember the last time he sat down, and now that the excitement has subsided a bit, now that Mary and the baby are comfortable, he leans against the wall of the stable and he feels his eyes grow weary. He still hasn't figured it out. The mystery of this entire event has puzzled him. But he hasn't the energy to wrestle with these questions. What's important is that the baby is fine and Mary is safe. As sleep comes, he remembers the name that the angel told him to use, Jesus. We will call him Jesus. Wide awake is Mary. How young she looks. Her head rests on the soft leather of Joseph's saddle. The pain has been eclipsed by wonder as she looks into the face of this baby, her son, her Lord, his majesty. At this point in history, the human being who understands who God is and what he's doing in the world is a teenage girl, in a stable. She can't take her eyes off of him because Mary is holding God. So this is he. She remembers the words of the angel. His kingdom will never end. He looks anything like a king. His face is prunish and red. His cry, though strong and healthy, is still the cry of a baby. And he is absolutely dependent upon Mary for his well-being. Majesty in the midst of the mundane. Holiness in the filth of sheep manure and sweat. Divinity entering the world on the floor of a stable, through the womb of a teenager, and in the presence of a carpenter. She touches the face of infant God. How long was your journey, she wonders. The baby had overlooked the universe. The rags that kept him warm were the robes of eternity. His golden throne room had been abandoned in favor of a dirty sheep pen, and worshiping angels had been replaced with kind but bewildered shepherds. Meanwhile, the city hums. The merchants are unaware that God has just visited their planet. The innkeeper would never believe that he had just sent God into the cold. And the people would scoff at anyone who told them that the Messiah lay in the arms of a teenage girl on the outskirts of their village. They were all way too busy to consider the possibility. Those who missed His Majesty's arrival that night missed it not because of evil acts or malice. No, they just missed it because they weren't looking. Little has changed in the last 2,000 years, has it? So this is a book by a guy named Max Lucado. It's called God Came Near. And I read it every Christmas for that reminder. Because sometimes it's really easy to get caught up when it comes close to Christmas, right? There's too much to do before Christmas break. There's too much stress when you think about having to see your family or maybe having to split time between your mom and your dad's. And it's easy for us to get so caught up in Christmas celebrations that we forget who we're celebrating. That we forget that God came into the world as a human, which means that He came into the world to redeem everything that we do in our bodies. That God came into the world as a baby. He came in helpless. He was sustained by a teenage girl. And that God sent His only Son, He sent Jesus, so that He could redeem us. From the beginning of creation, His plan was a girl in a stable with a carpenter husband who was just surprised to find out that she was going to give birth to God. And so this Christmas season, I want to challenge you guys that no matter what you're going through and what stress you're dealing with, keep looking for God in the midst of this, because it can be really easy to miss Him if you're not looking for Him. Amen? All right. So now we're going to transition to something fun. As you guys know, our Christmas program is next week. It starts at 6:21, normal time as Collide, but we're going to ask that you guys, if you're in the Christmas program, you're going to be here at 5:30. That being said, we're doing this awesome play. It's really funny. It's called Writer's Block. And this story that I just told, this is basically the retelling of the story, but this kid's trying to make it more interesting, right? Because that's like kind of gross. Jesus is born in a stable, and there's cow manure, and that's you know the whole thing of this is he's like, I want to tell it more exciting. I'm going to tell it with Star Wars. I'm going to tell it with ninjas. So I'm going to assign some roles right now. There's speaking roles and there's non-speaking roles. So I'm just going to